Good morning, welcome. Norwood City Council Special Meeting, January 1st, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please stand for prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chamber, we pray for thy divine guidance that we may do all things well according to thy holy will. Amen.
To the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Braden, would you act as clerk of council, please? John.
Sorry, I can't hear, guys.
Mr. Braden, would you act as clerk of council until we elect a clerk of council?
Would you act as clerk of council until
Oh,
elected?
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, you need to come down here so we can call the roll. Okay, we're going to call the roll for the... Please call the roll for the newly elected members.
Roll call?
Yes.
Roll call. Mr. Bonzel.
Here.
Mr. Gabbard.
Here.
Mr. Geraci.
Here.
Mr. Kelsch.
Here.
Mr. DiNardo.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Braden. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Next item E, elect a clerk of council.
Yeah, Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to move that we elect Joe S. Gears as clerk of council for this term.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Second.
Do you know if you're calling for discussion on that?
I would like to.
Yeah, you have to call discussion. We have to vote on that one first.
Okay.
and
Yeah,
then-
we can't go.
Discussion, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So Joe S. Gears has served us as the clerk of council for the past 2 years, and he's done an honorable job. I also have checked with Mr. Gears, and he is willing to serve at the current rate of pay for that position without an increase, so that should also be a savings for the council if one of these ordinances that are on the agenda here today were to pass at some time in the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Pre-
Nope.
So will you go ahead and
Call the roll.
Please call the roll, Mr. Braden.
Please call the roll. Mr. Bonzel.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
No.
Mr. Geraci.
No.
Mr. Kelsch.
No.
Mr. DiNardo.
No.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden votes no.
Do we have another nominee? Mr. DiNardo.
Yep, I would like to nominate Maria Williams for the position.
Do I have a second?
I'd like to second.
Mr. Kelch? Any discussion?
Yep. Maria Williams, I've already spoken with her. I think she'd be a great fit for the role. She's already done a lot of work just in preparation for this meeting, and I think would make a great addition to the team.
Any further discussion? Mr. Bonds?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So I will be voting no on this motion, but I have appreciated the outreach of Maria Williams so far, and just her getting some of the stuff out to us. So I think she will do great as the clerk of council, but I will still be voting no. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll, Mr. Braden.
Mr. Bonzel.
No.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
No.
Mr. Braden votes yes.
That is 4-3 for...
4-2.
4-2 for Mrs.
Or 5-2.
5-2, forgive me, for Mrs. Williams. Mrs. Williams, please come forward, take your seat. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Braden. Give me a second to get settled. Next on the agenda, item F, elect the President Pro Tem.
Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to nominate Mr. Gabbard as President Pro Tem.
Do I have a second?
You do, Eric Donato.
Second by Mr. Donato. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Gabbard has served before on council. I think his expertise in your absence will serve us greatly.
Thank you, Mr. Kels. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes.
No.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All in favor, right?
Yes, all in favor. The ayes 7, noes 0. Moving on to elect the Clerk of Council Pro Tem, item G on the agenda.
Mr. President, I'd like to nominate John Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Geraci.
Yeah, I guess for initial discussion, John Braden was doing the job about 30 seconds ago, and I think he did a pretty good job and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. Please call the roll, Mrs. Williams.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting ayes 7, noes 0. Item H, elect a secretary to the Clerk of Council. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to nominate Laura Velez as the secretary to the Clerk of Council.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Mr. Gabbard.
Yes. Ms. Velez is, from my understanding, as the president of council, and Ms. Williams, their clerk, did several interviews, and she was the best candidate. I know that her and her husband Tyre, residents here in Norwood, that truly love our city and want to be involved in our city and active. And so I think that she'll do a good job, and look forward to working with her on council.
Any further discussion? Mr. Thompson.
In the past, I believe this has been a decision left up to the clerk of council, and council hasn't actually voted to nominate this position. I'm curious as to why we are nominating as a body this position instead of letting the clerk choose whomever she would wish to have as a secretary.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'd like to go through the chair to the law director and get his comments on if we should vote on this. Is this something that needs to be voted on, or you give us direction here?
Right. The secretary is appointed. The secretary to the clerk of council is appointed by council. So yes, you need to vote on this.
Any further discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe, just to Mr. Thompson's point, Miss Williams, apologies, has been involved in this process and is approved and has chosen a qualified person. So just to put your mind at ease, Miss Williams is involved in picking this process. So thank you.
Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask a question, I guess, to the Clerk of Council through the chair. The hours of operation, I know that, the cheesesteak, the AJ's operates during lunch hours, and normally, at least traditionally, the Clerk of Council's office has been opened from around 10 a.m. or like 9:30 to 3, or 9:30 to 2. I'm not exactly sure the exact hours. Either way, what are the hours of operation that you all expect to hold, and is the Secretary to the Clerk of Council able to hold those hours?
It's the expectation that she'll be working 9 to 3, Monday through Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes. Move on to item I, to enact the standing rules of council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve and file the standing rules of council.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard. Do I have a second? By Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that we amend the rules of council to remove the prayer from our standard meeting list. I believe, I understand, and I understand this might be controversial, but we are a government agency. We do have a separation of church and state within this country and within our state and within our city. I believe that the prayer as it is currently stated focuses on a single religion, while as a body we represent people of all religions and people with no religion within this city. And I believe because of that, we should either remove it from our standard procedure or at least place it in the law committee until an appropriate version of a prayer can be adapted, one that is agnostic to all religions, or maybe even something where we invite people to come and give an invocation before council, regardless of specific religion.
If they say no, then no.
We have a motion by Mr. Gabbard. Will you amend your motion, Mr. Gabbard?
No.
Do we have a second? Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I don't necessarily have an opinion either way on the prayer, but I will say that I truly do believe that if the city was challenged on it, that the city tried to fight it, that the city would lose. I do think that Mr. Thompson has a good idea that has been accepted in other communities where you can invite leaders of faith to come in and give an invocation at the beginning of the meeting, and that would be, as he said, like any religion would be allowed to do that. I'm not saying that we need to necessarily change that right here, but I would recommend that this council look into that, just one, to protect the city, and two, to be fair to all of our residents that have many different religions. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I like the prayer that we say, and I would also add that if there's anyone who would like to invite someone to come in and say a prayer before the meeting also, that would be just fine. So I would hope that we would keep this on our agenda, and if anyone would like to invite anyone to come in and say the invocation before our meetings, it would be welcome. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll, Mrs. Williams.
Point of order. Just a clarification on our vote. What we're actually voting for, just to make sure that we're voting.
We are voting.
We're voting on my.
We're voting on your.
Okay, just to approve as is.
To approve as is.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Braden.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonsall.
No.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
No.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting
No, 5-7.
5 to 2.
Yeah, 5-2.
Motion passes. Item J, council member assignments to committees. What's your pleasure, gentlemen? Mr. Braden.
I would like to make a motion that we receive and file and pass the committee motion.
Committee
agenda.
assignments?
Yes.
Thank you,
Like to
Mr. Braden. Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting 7-0. Moves us to item K on the agenda, appoint self-nominate OKI Board of Directors representative. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to graciously give my services and I would like to be this nominee if this body so sees fit.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Do I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Thompson.
I would motion that we nominate Mr. Braden to the position of the OKI Board of Directors representative.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Geraci. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. So one thing, I did serve for 1 year as the OKI representative, and it's a very fascinating group. There's a lot of important group because there's a lot of things that happen there, and there's a lot of opportunities there for Norwood if we had some organization, I guess, to kind of benefit from it, like, when it comes to projects and things that they do. So I'm fine voting for Mr. Braden, but I would recommend, Mr. President, that potentially the city administration look at serving in this capacity in the future, just so that they will have the connections there and the networks there, and to try to take advantage of some of these dollars. And there's millions of dollars in transportation grants and stuff that are available. So I would hope that I'd hope the city administration would consider that in the future. But I have no issue voting yes today for Mr. Braden. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Braden. Move us on to item L, communication from Law Director regarding salary ordinance. Would you please read that, Mrs. Lewis?
Sure. Regarding ordinance adjusting certain salary ranges, etc. Dear Mr. President and members of council, the ordinance adjusting certain salary ranges on the agenda for January 1st, 2020 meeting references, in particular, Ordinance 33-2009, which is the basic ordinance providing for the city's non-union, non-classified positions and their existing salary ranges. Attached is a copy of that ordinance. I'm also attaching two other ordinances passed since 33-2009. Ordinances 34-2018, adding permanent part-time clerks, and 11-2014, which authorizes the auditor to designate whether the assistant deputy auditor is a full-time position or a part-time position, and designating a maximum part-time pay rate. Wishing you the best in the new term. Sincerely, Keith Moore, Norwood Law Director.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. What's your pleasure, gentlemen?
Just to receive and file.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to receive and file the letter. Do I have a second?
I'll
by
second
Mr.
that.
Geraci. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting 7-0. Motion passes. That moves us on to item M.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we place item M and N into the Finance Committee for examination.
I have a motion from Mr. Gabbard to place item M and N into the Finance Committee for consideration. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Gabbard.
I appreciate the mayor. Actually, I think he met with everybody individually to kind of go over what his thought was, what his plan is on this, and I agree with a lot of it. My drawback on this is a couple different things. Number one, that we're only designating just his office, which I understand. Well, he said that it was just his, that we're under him, but we also have clerk of council in here, and we also have the secretary, which are not under him, so that's not the case. And, if we're going to give the clerk of council and the secretary raises, then let's give the council back the raises that they took a 10% cut on. We took my first term, we took a 10% cut, and that's never been given back. And so, and I'm not asking for that. I'm just saying we need to, and none of us, I think, except for Mr. Bonzo, Mr. Braden, who are incumbents coming back, have seen copies of the budget, have been, know how this is going to fit into the recovery plan. If the commission would even approve that, I think we would be better served to just be able to put this into finance, have discussion on that, everybody get the numbers, see how the breakdowns are, and go from there. I understand this is time sensitive. The mayor does need to be able to get people into place. He currently has some people in place as an interim thing, just to kind of fill the spot in the meantime. And we do need to expedite this as quickly as possible. So I would encourage finance to meet as soon as possible so we can move forward on this and get all the information that we need. Thank you.
Mr. DeNordo.
Thanks, Mr. President. I'm part of the Finance Committee, so actually just voted to chair it. So I'll make an effort to get that in, get us together as soon as possible. That makes a lot of sense. I still think it's worth taking a few minutes here and all of us discussing some of the items on here, just so people know what we're going to be talking about in the Finance Committee. The first thing that kind of comes to mind is the difference between organizational structure changes and the pay raises. I think that's probably not easily seen by some of the folks here. So some of these, removing the mayor's secretary and creating the executive assistant and administrative assistant, that sort of makes sense. As you said, the mayor kind of met with each of us and explained that vision, and having the administrative assistant being sort of a person of the people, going to meetings of our community leaders and being more of a face on the ground, it makes a lot of sense. That's a position that, in my mind, doesn't really exist today. So, and there's a few of these. There's about 5 I counted, which were kind of fell into the org structure changes, and there's costs associated with that, for sure. The salary raises, I think, in concept, makes sense to look at that when you're looking at an organizational structure change. Definitely. But this is not even day one, and I think it does make a lot of sense to ask ourselves, does this fit in with the plan and where? I think it's important to retain good people, no doubt. I think some of those folks are sitting here right now, and I think do a lot of good in the community. Mr. Gary sitting over there. But these people have already kind of accepted the job, and I'm not smiling when I say that. So let's just take a minute and see where they fit in. Specifically, there's 3 offices that would put us out of plan, and so I think as part of the Finance Committee, the 4 of us should go around and ask ourselves, line by line, where are they in the plan today? Where would they exceed plan today? And what should we do about that? So those are kind of the 2 biggies. And the last point, I think it's like section 4, which talks about the ability to, for the hiring manager to negotiate within 5 or 10% of that lowest part of the band. I think that makes a ton of sense, and I know it is increased cost, but all hiring managers in the city have to have some level of autonomy when they're hiring, and it's pretty bad practice to have to go back to council or whoever every time you want to negotiate a 1% change. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not how it works in my world outside of the government. So that's just one part that we can talk about in the Finance Committee, but I just wanted to let everyone, all the people know that's kind of a no-brainer in my mind. So thanks. So those are the 3 points I wanted to talk about. I didn't know the rest of the council's your thoughts.
Mr. Thompson.
I agree with most everything that everyone has said. For me personally, between the 2 ordinances, I'm more inclined to actually support the second one that applies salary range increases across the entire structure of the city. I don't think that we should be limiting this at this time to one department. I do realize that becomes an even greater financial issue with the city, and one that the Finance Committee should look into, because as those of us who have been on council know and dealt with the financial recovery plan know that when you've got money added in one place, it has got to come from somewhere else, and we've got to be able to determine where that is, and you all provide the best recommendations for that. So, but I would just encourage you to look at that one as we, or as you put this in the committee, because I think I don't want to make this a matter of fairness, but to only enact salary range increases on one department of a city which has many does not seem right to me. So I hope you will take a good look at what would be involved in making that happen as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Bonsall.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Thompson said. I don't see a huge issue with doing the increases because we're going to have to redo the financial recovery plan anyways. And essentially by, raising some of this pay, and all of these positions have been frozen for 10 years. So these pay grades, even though they'll have different people, they've all been frozen. So I don't see an issue with the concept of it because it's past necessary, and other departments have gotten raises over those 10% over the last 10 years. The issue that I have is with with the focus of the raises and it being only appointees from either Republican-controlled office or Republican majority council. And I truly believe, there's only 6 other appointed positions, and I think one of those appointed positions aren't even filled right now, so it doesn't seem to me a massive issue to have the other offices that have been waiting for these there's been requests in the past for these pay grades to rise in those other offices, and we have turned those down because we said we're not doing it until we do it comprehensively. Well, now that we have the chance to do it comprehensively, it should be done comprehensively. It should not be, those should not be excluded. The second part of it is that, as Mr. Moore stated in his letter, if we approve Ordinance A, then we are going to have 4 different salary or personnel type ordinances for appointed people that are going to have to be referenced every time that we're looking to figure out how much somebody should be paid or not be paid or what have you. So by not listing all of the appointed officials in Ordinance A, then the clerk in the auditor's office is going to have to go and figure out, is something on Ordinance A, is it on Ordinance B? In addition, there was an ordinance passed in 2014 for the auditor that is another one that just provides administrative burden to not have them all in one. And so Ordinance B, worked with the law director, reviewed it with the auditor, who does not support it but does not have objections to it, has said that Ordinance B is just a cleaner ordinance in general. So I would hope that we'd look at that. And then finally, I would say that I know that there's actual administrative staffing changes in here. I do find it not disingenuous, but I do find it interesting that we're getting rid of the mayor's secretary at a starting salary of $25,000 a year and adding an executive assistant to the mayor with a starting salary of $48,400. So that's a 93% increase. Now, I understand that the job description has been expanded, so that's fine, but their public perception out there, what I've seen or what I've heard is that, oh, well, that looks like just a little switcheroo there. So, and again, I know that there's job description, but I think that we should be cognizant of that. And then also the safety service director pay, I think, is vastly underpaid. And I do wish that the mayor would have brought a salary ordinance today that only had the safety service director in it, and potentially adding these 2 administrative assistants. And I think I would have been able to support 3 readings and support that, because I think the safety service director position is critical to the city. It is underpaid, and I think even the salary range that is put in this ordinance, it still only gets them to like Gulf Manor level for safety service director pay. So I do appreciate the mayor bringing that forward to us. And if somebody does make an amendment today to this ordinance to narrow the scope of it to just that, I would be in favor of that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any further discussion? Mr. Geraci.
While I do agree with everybody sitting up here that has spoke so far, but I would like to say that we do need some sort of salary range increase for that safety service director in order to get somebody better in here than what we've had over the past 15 years. We need somebody that's actually going to hit the ground running, somebody that's going to come in and do the job properly and the way that's going to benefit the city. So, I mean, I think if we do throw this into the Finance Committee, I would like them to at least take a hard look at it. And I do also believe that the second ordinance needs to be looked at as well, because I don't believe that current positions need a raise at this point, because that's what they would essentially be, as a raise for those current employees who are in place. And if those departments want to come and justify why those departments need the raise, then that's fine with me. They can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to respond to this one comment from the previous member of council. I think it's dangerous for us to say that, oh no, just because they're a current employee, we're just going to ignore them. But because somebody's a new employee, that or we're trying to attract a new employee, then that we raise that. And the reason why I think that's dangerous is because eventually it's saying, like, look, we can just fire one of these appointed employees, right, and then get that pay range up 10%, and then you can just hire somebody else. You know, I truly believe that many of these current civil servants, they've done an honorable job, they've served well, and by raising the pay range, it doesn't necessarily raise their pay unless their pay is in that bottom percentile, right? I guess that bottom 10 percentile that's going to get raised up. So, you know, I just want to be able to give the elected officials in that position the discretion to determine that pay. And, you know, like I said, us raising those ranges does not necessarily mean that they are getting a raise. It just means that we're raising the range so that the elected official could make that decision in the future if that fits in with the financial recovery plan. So, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Bonson. Mr. Geraci.
This will probably be my last, hopefully. I'm just wondering how this has now become a hot topic to give raises to current employees when it hasn't been over the last 10, 12 years. All of a sudden now that we're trying to adjust a salary range to bring in a well-qualified safety service director and somebody to help that safety service director along with the mayor, all of a sudden it becomes an issue that we need to make raises for every department across the board without any additional information. However, the last 10, 12 years, that hasn't been the case. It's been, we're freezing everybody.
Mr. Thompson.
I believe the reason that it's become such a hot topic is because of the ordinances that have been brought to our attention today. We didn't bring it up. It was the new mayor who brought it up. So we're talking about it. I don't think there's anything more nefarious than that. The idea that you would want to only provide salary range increase for a portion of your, what is basically a civic company, I think is disingenuous, and that's why we're raising the issue with the additional salary ranges. I also want to add, I would like, when this goes into Finance Committee, I believe that for part-time city employees, that we should look at raising the bottom level of our minimum wage to a $15 an hour, as opposed to the 13, what is it, you got it up here, 13.20. That's still within the range offered within the ordinance. But it would bring us up to a living wage for our part-time employees and for our minimum wage, or not minimum wage, but minimally paid employees, and I think we should take that into consideration as well, as long as we're looking at all non-union wages.
Is there anyone that hasn't spoken that would like to speak? Mr. Geraci.
All right. I still believe that these need to be adjusted, and for this council to actually take a proactive approach to make these adjustments, I feel is something that we need to do, and it's something that previous councils have not done. So I feel even with this coming on the first day, this is a proactive approach to improving our city.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, a lot of valid points. So, for the past 2 years, we have been scrutinizing and penny pinching, and we've done a pretty good job Finance Committee has gone over line by line what we're spending and how we're spending it, and making sure that it's appropriate. And now we have a new day in Norwood. We have a new administration who comes to us and says, these changes are necessary. These changes for me to be successful, for us to be the best that we can be. These changes need to be implemented, and it makes perfect sense that these changes are done. Now, however, where does that go from these changes to now instead of penny pinching that we've done for the past 2 years and all the good work that we've done, now we're okay with just, and let me just say this, whether or not they're justified, whether or not they need to have, these people are deserve raises. You know, most of the time when I get a raise, it's 2%, if I get a raise ever. However, it's on my job performance, and normally it's on a merit-based system. So if I do good, I get a raise, and normally it's 2%. So how this goes from our administration needs this to be the very best it can be, and it makes perfect sense to, let's just, whether or not they're justified or not, let's just give everybody it doesn't make a bit of sense to me, and it's really not that hard to figure out if you really think about it. So those are my comments, and I believe we should be supporting our new administration and allowing them to be the best that they can be, so because that's going to make us as a body better. So I believe this first, what has been brought to us by the administration is needed, and let's pass it.
I had a discussion.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify
What's pending?
what we're voting on. I asked for the discussion. It's been awesome. I'm glad we had it. But I know I think the motion was to put this to the Finance Committee. Correct. But then there was discussion on, Section 1 versus Section 2, and then I talked about Section 5. Is moving it to the Finance Committee the entire ordinance of all sections? If that's the case, then,
Yeah, I think we've been, we've just been discussing what should be discussed
In the
Finance Committee.
Okay. Well then, we can move forward. And just to comment, that 2% compounded over 10 years would well exceed some of the 7 to 14% I just back of the paper here. But point very much still taken. And we can talk about all that in the Finance Committee.
Mr. Kelch.
Mr. President, a lot of good points, like Mr. Braden said, and I agree with a lot on both sides. I think with the new administration coming in, our city's looking for us to make some changes that are going to help us. And I think that's what the mayor's doing here. Spoke with him quite a few times about this. Going forward, I think he's got a good plan. I think it's a well thought out plan. And I also agree with Mr. Gabbard, we have not seen the budget, so we don't really know exactly how this plan is going to hit us. I agree with Mr. Breeden talking about we need to get people in position to help make these changes in the city that the people elected us to make. However, I would like to see at least this first ordinance limited to at least the safety service director, the executive assistant of the mayor, and the administrative assistant, so he can leave us something to build on going forward. But I think we're going to the committee with it.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Any further discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to encourage this body to pass this bill. I don't believe we can send the second one into committee, but the first one, we need to vote that down and pass the first amendment. If we want to look at the other one, we most certainly can and should. But the first one, I'm going to encourage us to not vote to put that in committee and to vote to pass this resolution. Thank you. I'd like to encourage everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Any further discussion? Just to be clear, motion by Mr. Gabbard, seconded by Mr. DiNardo, is to move item N and N to the Finance Committee.
Okay. So, if, sorry. Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to, unless there was some kind of a motion or there was something made that was going to amend Ordinance A to limit it to the Safety Service Director and the other And then section 1, I was going to vote yes to table it. And once it's tabled, then there's no other further discussion on it. So I'm going to vote yes, but I haven't really heard that there's an actual plan. I was expecting maybe that the body would go into recess so that the clerk or whoever could provide us something that, ordinance A could be amended to. But anyways, long story short, I'm going to vote yes to table it, but if we do table it, then that basically means that we're not talking about adjusting the safety service director position and then adding the 2 administrative assistant positions. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Mr. Gabbard, do you have your hand up, sir?
No.
Any further discussion? So again, just to be clear, motion by Mr. Gabbard, second by Mr. DiNardo.
Mr. Thompson.
I'm sorry,
Second.
Mr. Thompson, forgive me, was to move item M and N to the Finance Committee. Please call the roll, Mrs. Williams.
Mr. Bunsell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
No.
All members present voting, 6-1, motion passes. Brings us to item O. Communication from Law Director, communication from Law Department regarding appointment of Energy Improvement District Board member. Could you read those, please?
Regarding appointment of Energy Improvement District Board member. In 2016, Council passed a resolution approving the creation and incorporation of an Energy Special Improvement District. One member of the Board of Directors of that corporation must be a member of Norwood City Council. The position had previously been filled by Donna Lake and John Mumper. The Board of Directors is required to meet at least once per year to review the status of energy special improvement projects approved by City Council and some administrative tasks. Additional meetings are required to approve for new projects that may be proposed. With this letter, I am requesting that Council designate the identity of that member at the January 1st or 12th, 2020 Council meeting. A motion to nominate followed by a letter from the Clerk of Council to the ESID Board should be sufficient to memorialize the appointment. Thank you, Keith Moore, Norwood Law Director.
Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm not sure if there's already somebody in mind for this. Donna Lake did a superb job serving in this position previously and did a great job keeping the council updated on what the Energy Improvement District Board was doing. It's really an important board that allows property owners to essentially finance energy improvement projects and through bonds and then pay those bonds back on their property taxes for so many years. And so it really is a great program, and we've had two different companies use it here in the city of Norwood. CDK Global and the owner of that property was one of them, and I think the other one was at the old MedPace building. So there are, like I said, it's a great board, great things that happen there. So I'm willing to serve in that capacity, but I'm also willing to support anybody else that wants to serve there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bonson.
Point of clarification, do we need to nominate someone? Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're looking for with this particular item, is to nominate someone now?
Yes. Well, we're going to receive and file the letter and then...
Oh, that's right.
I would do a combination motion, receive and file the letter, appoint this person, send a letter and notice, yeah, but basically, yes, the council has to appoint someone to sit on the board. And it's got to be a council member or a president.
That's not the OKI, is it?
No, you got the okay. Mr. President,
Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the letter and also nominate Mr. Bonzel for this position.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunsell.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting, 7-0. Brings us to item P, Ohio Liquor Board regarding the safekeeping of a liquor license. Is there a letter? No, I don't think there was a letter.
Yeah.
Mr. Bonson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So the previous clerk, I think usually there's like a part where it says like there's some directions on it. I think they usually just read the directions, like basically please respond by this date,
Yeah,
or just give a summary of it.
sure.
113, 2020.
The clerk's office received a communication from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control. We need to complete and return the form to the Division of Liquor Control, whether or not we're requesting a hearing. The company is Ventura Commons, doing business as Roosters, Roosters Miamisburg. It's my understanding that they are looking to move their liquor license to Norwood. This is not to make it operational at this point, but rather just to put it in holding. So, and this communication had been sent to the heads of all of the Norwood departments, and it's my understanding that no one thus far has objected to it.
Correct. Mr. Bonds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. So this one specifically, these are really kind of confusing, so thank you so much. So this one specifically it's in safekeeping currently because I guess the Roosters Miamisburg probably closed at some point.
Yeah.
And they have now sold their liquor license to Ventura Commons through a Trex transfer.
Gotcha.
The previous council approved the Trex transfer, which is for economic development, which is a very vague term, but, and this really is going to be for the new banquet hall that council approved a CRA on. At the old Fidelity building at Sherman and Montgomery. And truly this is, we've used Trex transfers, and I don't believe in a negative way to bring various liquor licenses in to the city. But I would say this specific Trex transfer, more than probably any other ones that we've done so far, embodies the spirit of the economic development portion of the law because it really it's going to bring vitality to a corner that just doesn't have it right now, or at least a building that doesn't have it right now. So I will make the motion that we receive and file the letter and take no additional action. And by making that motion, we essentially are saying we don't have an objection and this is going to happen. The only time that we would have to actually take action is if we want to object to it and want to have a hearing. And we have done that before, but for this specific one, I think that we can probably all agree that this will be a massive benefit to the city of Norwood and that we should not object. So my motion is to receive and file the letter and take no additional action with regards to this.
Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Nardo? Yes. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
I would totally agree with Mr. Bonzo on this. Venturas are, I don't think they still live in Norwood, but they're old Norwood people, grew up here, good people, and wanting to really revitalize a corner that's pretty much the center point on our main drag of Montgomery Road there. And to be able to do something with that building that's not, that building has just been an eyesore for a lot of years, and they're wanting to really do something good with it. This would allow them to be able to turn that into a banquet hall and have a liquor license with it. I think it's a great idea. And so the thing on here says responses must be postmarked by the 13th, and our council, I don't think our first council meeting is until the 14th, so we don't have to do anything, correct? If we don't do anything, it's all fine. I just want to get clarification on that.
It's my understanding that we do still need to file a response, but in this situation, if that's what the council would like to do, we just have to mark, do not request a hearing.
Okay. I would like to ask Mr. Bonzo to amend his motion that we receive and file, and that the motion would be that we send a response saying that we do not request a hearing, and so this can go forth.
Yeah.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I am fine to amend it. I mean, tradition in the past, we just don't send responses, and which just allows it to go through. But yeah, I'm definitely fine amending it so that we can send a response on this occasion.
Mr. Garrett.
No, you need whoever seconded it to.
Who did second?
Donato.
Yeah.
Donato. Is it Mr. Donato?
Yes, it is.
I can't see you. Yes.
I'm sorry, I've been doing that this entire meeting. Please forgive me.
Yeah, I mean, if we can amend it to that, I think the point is still achieving the same means, so, or the end, so the means is indifferent, it's fine.
Okay. Cool. Any further discussion? Mr. Tracy.
I think Trex is a hot topic, again, within the city of Norwood because we are saturated with our liquor licenses. But I believe that this one is actually going to be probably one of the best beneficial Trex to put out there for the city. We're not giving it to a bar, we're giving it to a banquet hall, just so that the residents know. We're giving it to something that could spur economic development and start that economic development within the city, just in the location that it's in.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the Trex transfer has already been approved. Just want to make sure that's clear. So the previous council voted on it and the form has been signed. So this right here would be, the only way that we could object to this anyways is to have, there was like some, maybe they owe taxes or some criminal enterprise or what have you, like, but the actual, the main part of the Trex has already been approved. So even if we did object to this, it would be very unlikely. So I just want to make sure that's clear, that really we don't have many options on this anyways, even if we did want to object to it. So, thank you.
Mr. Geraci?
I do understand that it has been passed. I understand that. I happen to receive numerous calls about this Trex, and I tried to explain the same thing to the residents that gave me a call. So I was just trying to put my 2 cents out there as to what the Trex was about, so that people really understand why this is coming to the city or why it was voted in by the previous council.
So to be clear, we're going to receive and file and to send the response. No further action required. Correct? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, motion passes 7-0. Item Q, excuse absent members. All members are present. Brings us to item R, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Cool. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I move that we adjourn.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.